Silence holds power. Not loud power, quiet power. It allows for clarity, for observation, for deep understanding. People who prefer silence often notice patterns others miss. They sense emotional shifts. They feel subtle changes in energy. They understand situations without needing constant explanation. Their strength lies in awareness. Silence allows space for thought, for reflection, for intentional action. Quiet people don't rush into words. They choose when to speak. And when they do, their words often carry weight. This is not accidental. It is the result of living inwardly before speaking outwardly. Embracing silence means embracing your natural rhythm. It means honoring how you process life. It means trusting your inner pace. You don't need to match the world's volume to belong. You belong by being real. Silence can be a place of grounding, of clarity, of inner peace. When you stop seeing silence as something to fix, it becomes something to use. You begin to create spaces that support your energy. You choose environments that feel calm. You protect your inner world without guilt. And in that protection, your depth becomes your strength. Silence becomes a foundation, not a flaw. You don't disappear in silence. You gather yourself there. And from that gathered place, you move through life with quiet confidence. Not loud, not forced, just grounded. Some people don't feel comfortable in noise. They don't enjoy filling every moment with words. They don't rush to speak just to be noticed. And for a long time, many of them believed something was wrong with them. Because the world is loud. The world celebrates people who talk easily, laugh loudly, and fill rooms with their presence. Silence is often seen as awkward. Quietness is misunderstood as weakness. And choosing not to speak is sometimes mistaken for shyness, fear, or social failure. But for many people, silence is not something they fall into. It is something they choose. They choose silence because it feels natural. They choose silence because it feels honest. They choose silence because words, when used too often, start to lose meaning. There are people who feel more themselves when they are not forced to perform. They don't feel the need to narrate every thought. They don't feel comfortable speaking just to avoid awkward moments. They value presence more than performance. To them, silence is not empty. It is full of awareness, full of thought, full of inner clarity. But society often sends a different message. It tells people that being quiet means being invisible, that being silent means being unsure, that if you are not constantly speaking, you are not contributing. So many people who prefer silence grow up learning to hide this part of themselves. They force smiles. They force conversations. They pretend to enjoy noise they secretly find exhausting. And over time, they start to feel disconnected from who they really are. The truth is, preferring silence is not a flaw. It is a temperament, a natural way of experiencing the world. Some people process life internally. They reflect before they speak. They listen more than they talk. They observe patterns in people, emotions, and situations. They don't rush into conversations. They wait until they feel something meaningful to say. Silence for them is not a lack of personality. It is a different kind of presence. When you prefer silence, you often notice things others miss. The change in someone's tone, the pause between words, the tension in a room, the emotion behind a smile. Your mind is active even when your mouth is quiet. But because silence is misunderstood, people who prefer it often feel pressured to change. They may feel like they have to become louder to be accepted. They may feel like they need to explain themselves. They may even feel guilty for enjoying quiet moments. This pressure slowly creates inner conflict. On one side, they crave calm. On the other, they fear being judged for it. That inner tension is exhausting. And yet, silence remains where they feel most grounded. It is where their thoughts feel clear. It is where they can breathe without performance. It is where they don't feel rushed to be something they're not. Silence is not the absence of connection. For many people, it is the most honest form of connection with themselves. And once someone begins to accept that their preference for silence is not a weakness, but a natural part of who they are, everything begins to shift. Because silence is not emptiness, it is space. And in that space, people learn who they truly are. For many people who prefer silence, quiet is more than comfort. It is safety. Silence creates a sense of emotional protection. It reduces the need to explain. It reduces the risk of being misunderstood. It creates a boundary between the inner world and the outer noise. Some people feel emotionally overwhelmed by too much interaction, not because they dislike people, but because constant social energy drains them. Every conversation requires emotional presence. Every interaction pulls a piece of attention. And when someone is naturally sensitive to emotional energy, noise becomes heavy. Silence allows them to recharge. It allows them to return to themselves, to organize thoughts, to settle emotions, to regain balance. In silence, there is no pressure to perform, no pressure to entertain, no pressure to react quickly. It becomes a space where they don't have to be on. This is why silence often feels peaceful to them, not lonely, not empty, peaceful. But people often misunderstand this. They think quiet people are distant. They think silence means someone is cold or uninterested. They assume that if someone isn't constantly engaging, they must not care. In reality, many quiet people care deeply. They just don't express it loudly. They process emotions internally. They reflect before responding. They take time to feel before they speak. Silence becomes a form of emotional regulation. It protects them from overstimulation. It shields them from emotional chaos. It gives them control over their inner state. In noisy environments, they may feel scattered. Their thoughts become crowded. Their emotions feel less organized. They struggle to focus on what they actually feel. But in silence, clarity returns. Silence helps them hear their own thoughts. It helps them understand what they want. It helps them notice when something feels wrong. This is why many quiet people seek calm spaces, not because they hate people, but because they need room to process life. Silence is where they reconnect with themselves. And this emotional safety is often misunderstood as avoidance. People assume that quiet people are running away from interaction, but many are simply choosing environments that feel emotionally balanced. They're choosing peace over performance, clarity over chaos, depth over noise. When someone repeatedly feels emotionally overwhelmed by loud environments, they slowly learn to protect themselves with silence. They learn where they feel most grounded. They learn what drains them. They learn what restores them. This creates a natural preference for calm. Over time, silence becomes associated with relief, with emotional breathing space, with the feeling of being okay without having to prove anything. And because this association forms internally, it doesn't disappear just because society values loudness. Quiet people often build their emotional stability around silence. It becomes their way of staying connected to themselves in a world that constantly demands attention. Silence is not a rejection of others. It is a way of protecting inner peace. And once someone realizes that their preference for silence is rooted in emotional self-care, not social failure, they begin to release the shame around being quiet. Because choosing emotional safety is not weakness, it is self-awareness. Preferences are rarely random. They form through experience. For many people, silence becomes meaningful because of moments in their past. Sometimes speaking didn't feel safe. Sometimes expressing emotions led to misunderstanding. Sometimes being open resulted in being ignored or dismissed. Over time, silence becomes a learned comfort. Not because people are afraid of speaking, but because silence once brought peace when words brought tension. If someone grew up feeling unheard, they may learn to keep thoughts private. If someone was misunderstood often, they may learn to protect their inner world. If someone felt overwhelmed in loud environments, they may learn to seek calm spaces. These experiences don't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. Being interrupted too often, being laughed at for expressing feelings, feeling emotionally unseen in conversations. Small moments shape emotional habits. Silence becomes familiar. It becomes predictable. It becomes safe. Over time, this pattern forms a preference, not because the person is broken, but because they learned where they feel most stable. Silence can also be where people learn to think, to reflect, to understand themselves. When words didn't bring clarity, silence did. So they began to associate quiet with inner order, with emotional control, with personal safety. This is why silence can feel grounding. It reminds the nervous system of calm. It signals that nothing needs to be performed, that nothing needs to be explained. People who prefer silence often developed a strong inner world. They learned to process emotions internally. They learned to sit with thoughts. They learned to understand feelings without needing external validation. And because of this, silence feels like home. It is not emptiness, it is familiarity. But when people don't understand this background, they assume silence is avoidance. They assume quiet people are hiding something. They assume silence means emotional distance. In reality, silence often holds deep emotional processing. Quiet people may feel deeply. They may care deeply. They may reflect deeply. They simply don't externalize every thought. Their silence is not absence, it is depth. Understanding this helps release self-judgment. When someone realizes their preference for silence formed as a way to find emotional balance, they stop seeing it as a flaw. They begin to see it as a response to life, not a weakness, not a defect, but an adaptation. And once someone sees their silence as something that helped them survive emotionally, they can stop trying to fight it. Because silence was never the enemy, it was the shelter. The world often rewards loudness. People who speak quickly are seen as confident. People who talk a lot are seen as social. People who fill silence are seen as comfortable. Quiet people are often misread. They are seen as distant, uninterested, cold, unfriendly. But these labels come from misunderstanding, not truth. Society is uncomfortable with silence. Silence creates space for reflection, and many people are not comfortable with reflection. So, silence is filled with assumptions. Quiet people feel this pressure constantly. They feel expected to perform socially, to talk more, to smile more, to react faster. Over time, this pressure creates shame. They begin to believe something is wrong with them. They try to become louder. They force conversations. They pretend to enjoy noise. But this performance drains them emotionally, because pretending to be someone else costs energy. The truth is, loudness is not confidence, and quietness is not weakness. Confidence is comfort with yourself, and many quiet people are deeply comfortable internally. They simply don't need noise to feel seen. Quiet people often connect deeply in small moments. They listen fully. They notice details. They offer presence rather than performance. But these qualities are harder to see in fast-moving social environments, so society overlooks them. This creates a painful experience of being misunderstood, not because quiet people lack value, but because the world often measures value through volume. Once someone realizes this, the shame begins to lift. They understand that their quiet nature is not the problem. The misunderstanding is. They stop trying to force themselves into roles that don't fit. They stop apologizing for needing calm. They stop measuring themselves by loud standards. And in that release, they begin to feel more at peace with who they are. Quiet people don't need to become louder to matter. They matter as they are.